The other element then to consider in are we triggering neuroplasticity is creating conditions for novel or newness. Things which are novel and new helps us to really bring our skills to bear, really challenges us, creates a unique scenario, and we're having to adapt. Our neurons are firing off in that network and they're going, hang on, how do we deal with this? It might take you a little bit longer. It might take you a little bit more. It might increase that level of challenge for you. But that newness and novelty is important. And you might repeat and repeat and repeat that until it doesn't feel new and novel anymore.
This is Recovery After Stroke with Bill Gassiamis, helping you go from where you are to where you'd rather be.
Bill from recoveryafterstroke.com. This is episode 86, and my guest today from Occupational Therapy Brisbane is David Norris. David was also a guest on episode 76, where we discussed some of the things that you can do to improve your fatigue symptoms. Now, just before I get started, I wanted to let you know that you can now download all the words of this episode as a PDF. It's perfect if you prefer to read and take notes or highlight different parts of the interview for future reference. It's a great way to learn and helps retain new information to memory. Just go to recoveryafterstroke.com, click on the image of the episode you have just listened to, and at the very beginning of the page, you will see a button that says Download Transcript. Click the button, enter your email address, and the PDF will begin downloading. Also, a few weeks ago, I launched Recovery After Stroke Coaching. The people who have signed up are now being coached by me and are being helped to overcome challenges, including fatigue, anger, isolation, amongst other things. So if you're a stroke survivor that wants to know how to heal your brain, overcome fatigue, and reduce anxiety, Recovery After Stroke Coaching might be perfect for you. If you have fallen in the cracks between hospital and home care and desire to gain momentum in your recovery but do not know where to start, this is where I can help. I will coach you and help you gain clarity on where you are currently in your recovery journey. I will help you create a picture of where you would like to be in your recovery 12 months from now, and I will coach you to overcome what's stopping you from getting to your goal. During coaching, I will also teach you the 10 steps to brain health for stroke survivors and guide you through each step with supporting interviews from experts and information that is based on the latest scientific research. If you take up this offer, you will get a one-on-one coaching thread with me, access to the course 10 Steps to Brain Health for Stroke Survivors when released, access to member-only monthly group training calls, and access to the Stroke Survivors private forum. Be one of the first 10 people who join Recovery After Stroke Coaching now and get the first 7 days free. To get Recovery After Stroke Coaching, click the link below if you're watching on YouTube, or go to recoveryafterstroke.com if you are listening online. And now it's on with the show. David Norris from Occupational Therapy Brisbane, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Bill, for having me.
You're welcome, mate. We travelled some distance, about 1,000 kilometres each one time, to meet in the middle in Sydney, me from Melbourne, you from Brisbane, where when we did meet, we had an amazing chat about the kind of work that you do and the space that I'm working in. And I thought it'd be a great opportunity to get together and share some of the stuff that you know around helping people heal, especially since you're a professional occupational therapist. And my community is always looking for tips and tricks and ways to heal. So some of the work that I've been doing in the past is contacting people from all over the world, including professional neuroscientists and researchers. And a little while ago on episode 27, I contacted Dr. Michael Merzenich, who's considered to be the godfather of neuroplasticity, and he's been researching the field since the 90s or even the mid to late 80s. But during that interview, I've got to say I was a little bit starstruck, and I didn't really ask many questions about the detail that people need to know about neuroplasticity and what it is. And I really just only asked him about him. But it was still a great interview and still shed some insights into that. I'm so excited today because we're going to get to dive in a little bit deeper into what neuroplasticity is. But before we do that, can you tell me a little bit about what it is that you do?
No doubt, I can appreciate why you were starstruck with Dr. Michael. He is a walking tomb of knowledge around neuroplasticity, and by no stretch of my imagination do I even compare to his in-depth knowledge around the machinations of neuroplasticity. However, he has set a trail that many neuroscientists have gone, and he's also proved to be an invaluable and I guess representative of a collective group of people that have brought more understanding around the workings of the brain and how to work with it in order to get a good outcome or work towards an outcome for a client. And that's where I've perhaps picked up the baton from the neuroscientists of the world and their ongoing research into neuroplasticity, is then bringing that content, that knowledge, into an architecture around the recovery process after a stroke. And I'm excited to be able to talk to your audience about that today.
I never understood the need for neuroplasticity until I needed neuroplasticity. And I suppose some of the people listening and watching will be wondering, what is neuroplasticity and why do I need it? So I suppose that's a really good place to start the conversation. Why do we need to know about neuroplasticity?
Yeah, okay. If I put it in an experience that as an OT, when I started working my private practice, one of my first clients that I had come to me was a gentleman that had survived a stroke, and it was a very large, dense stroke. That's probably a term that you've heard before. A dense stroke, meaning has quite a pervasive effect on not only our cognition of how we're thinking, our language expression, but also on a movement and sensory experience as well. And he had one which affected his right side of his body. He came to me 6 years after his stroke, and for the first 6 or so years, his primary focus was really about movement, being able to walk again, being able to move from bed, move from a sitting position to a standing position, to be able to get into the shower area and do the things that he needed to do. But it almost happened at the detriment of his upper limb performance. And so when he reached out to me, one of the first few things that I really try and identify with folk is, what are we working towards? And I really want to make it very practical, very goal-orientated about what is it you want to do. Now, of course, I wish I had a magic wand, and that magic wand enabled me to say, look, yes, in 6 months' time, we're going to get full recovery. I, as an occupational therapist, are working towards what is it really important for you, because life has changed dramatically. What could be the outcome that we could aim for? And if so, what would you like to be able to do? And for this chap, he wanted to hold a Corona and be able to drink from the stubby as he watched the State of Origin football game between Queensland and New South Wales. Now, for many people outside of Australia, that probably is equivalent to sitting down and enjoying cold, icy beverage during the Super Bowl, or maybe a great soccer game in the UK. But for this gentleman, it was very much a statement of purpose, recovery, and being. He really wanted to achieve that. So over 12 months from having significant movement deprivation, he'd not learned how to use his arm for a long time. He couldn't turn a light on. He couldn't operate the lifts in his building. He couldn't open a drawer with his most dominant hand, his right hand. And throughout the 12 months, we step by step are able to achieve those things to the point where he could go to a social occasion with his partner, reach out with his right hand and shake that person's hand comfortably. We got there in the end, got him to be able to drink a Corona. Now, I think that's a really powerful example about how the brain's plasticity, and that's not to say that the brain is plastic. The plasticity in that term refers to that it's bendable, it's flexible, it's flexibility. its changeability. It has the capacity, the brain has the capacity to change its structure, its function, and organization of neurons in response to the environment, in response to the experiences you put in front of it. So when you think about that gentleman's journey in his stroke recovery, he didn't put many experiences in front of his upper limb use to encourage, to explore it, to reveal the possibilities, to challenge it, to nudge it. And hence, neuroplasticity in that context had a darker side. It didn't adapt. It shrunk. It reduced its connectivity. It became weaker. The other side became more dominant.
Awesome. We're going to explore that a little bit deeper. But did you have an idea about why he didn't pursue that opportunity to rehabilitate his arm or to retrain his arm? So what happened?
Yeah, I think, look, I think that's a very complex question because each person's going to have perhaps different factors. But if I can map out a couple of the key things that I saw, one was that, it's a term that I often throw out quite often when I'm teaching folk about these concepts about brain health or neuroplasticity. The task determines the team. And for him, the task was, I wanted to walk. I wanted to be able to be mobile. And so the team around that was very much his physiotherapist who had strong skills in lower limb function, mobility, walking. That perhaps, though, meant that the doors that were opening were only in regards to looking at the lower limb, looking at trunk movement, looking at his leg strength. But for that chap, he only knew as much as he knew, and he really was reliant on his team around him to identify those areas to support and nudge him along. Sometimes, in my experience in observing folk, particularly, somebody who's experienced such a significant stroke like that, the pathway is very much set up in that rehab acute early phase about what is possible and is not possible. And for those wonderful and skilled therapists working in that space, they are working with people that are very early on in their journey and don't get to see the full opportunity in front of people over time. I was very, very lucky to work with that gentleman, and since then have worked with many people, stroke survivors, that are asking questions of themselves about what can I do? What's the limit of my potential here? And I think one of the most fabulous discoveries in neuroscience has been the unmasking and unveiling of what neuroplasticity can afford us. And then importantly, what are the levers to make neuroplasticity work for us? So I think in part there was a goal. His team around him were focused on that goal, however, weren't raising the possibilities of what else could we be doing. In some people's experience of stroke, there is an impact to our awareness of our body. In this chap's instance, that wasn't so much the case, and we might call that a neglect or a partial neglect, an ability or inability to be aware of that part of my body. And that in itself will raise its flags pretty early in somebody's recovery. But in this gentleman's instance, that wasn't the case. They may have tried early a couple of activities and maybe weren't as successful, didn't see the immediate results that they were achieving with their lower limb mobility, and therefore they went, you know what, this is my limited resource, energy, time, headspace that I can allocate towards this. I'm going to have a crack at just working on my mobility.
Yeah.
That could be some of the factors that were certainly influencing his recovery.
I think that's a really awesome answer, because when I interview people, often what I get from them is that they do say that, they may be 10 or 20 years down the track and they have regained a lot of a lot of abilities that were lost, perhaps. And then there was this one thing that they didn't really uh, get back, or this one thing that they really weren't able to improve on. So they identified clearly that it was most likely a scenario of focus in one area. And then once that area got up and running and they got busy or they got distracted by other parts of life, that this little thing or whatever it was just sort of slipped out into the periphery and wasn't something in that person's awareness. And an interview like this would have triggered in their mind, oh, actually, I'm somebody who has put all my recovery resources into using my arm, for example, and my leg is not the best. It's not what it could be, or my gait is not the best, or I'm not putting my foot properly on the ground. So that's a pretty good example of how it is that people just get distracted from everything else that needs to be done or everything else that needs to be supported. So I know that when I was in rehab as well, David, the occupational therapists um, and other therapists asked me specifically what I wanted to achieve. Well, they helped me achieve that, but we only had a limited window in which we could operate because I was booked into rehabilitation for a certain amount of time, and then it was time to go. So once we achieved that outcome, they kind of looked at me and said, okay, we've done that. Now we're at the end of rehabilitation. They didn't ask me what else they could support me with because they didn't have any more time with me and I had to be discharged. So
I think you've raised a couple of really important points there, Bill, about sometimes I refer it to almost like seasons in recovery. That for this season that I'm in or that person's in, the priority for me is blah. That might be a work priority, that might be a memory priority, that might be a movement priority, whatever it is for that particular person. But they said, look, my life's busy. I want to live my life. I don't want to be in life where I'm in rehab all the time. Like I'm not rehabbing when I'm in my kitchen. I'm not rehabbing when I'm going down my stairs at the front of my house. I'm not rehabbing when I'm playing with my kids or grandkids. I just want to be me and enjoying that moment. And I think we need to have a sense of forgiveness with ourselves when we are going through this, because if we can do one thing really well, we've nailed it. We're going to get good results. We're going to put all our attention and our focus, and where our focus goes, energy flows, and we're going to get the adaptive change. And I think it's important to recognize that once we've gone through the washing machine of hospital, acute, rehab, day hospital, spat out the back end, and you're thinking, now what? I've got life's busy. I've got some commitments. I'm trying to pull all that together. What can I do? I still want to keep going on this pathway. Having a cast of thousands of different rehab professionals around them can make it really hard. So I really want to say that coming up with a plan, though, and having a long game view, that I'm in this phase right now and these are my targets and goals. And once I've hit that, this is my next priority for me, is a really nice way to approach it. I think that's probably worth mentioning, is that it's quite, think about it as seasons, because we're in it for the long game.
I like that. Definitely, I was overwhelmed by the amount of rehabilitation days and appointments I had after I was discharged. So we did a little bit of outpatient rehab, and sometimes 3 or 4 times a week on different days I would have to go to rehab, and it was extremely difficult. And I did get to the point where, and people listening who have been through something similar might see the similarity, I did get to the point where I thought, I cannot be bothered with this anymore, and I'm going to take the rehabilitation stage now. I'm going to take that responsibility home with me, and I'm going to do what I can on my own. And at that time, if I did get busy with family life, with work, with whatever it was, then rehabilitation did take a back seat. It definitely something that I needed to stop doing for a little while I did my daily tasks, while I did my
Yeah.
chores, while I tried to make a living. So I get that. And that's a really good way for people to understand why they may be 20 years down the track and all of a sudden forgotten that there was this other little part of them that would have been great to rehabilitate.
The You mentioned another point earlier too about in hospital that you'd had a very brief amount of time with therapists and then all of a sudden it stops. One of the factors around neuroplasticity is making sure that, much like going to the gym, if you want to get that muscle bulk change in your body, if you want to get that athletic lean element to you, or if you've got some goals around strength, you've got to put in the reps. You've got to put in that sort of volume. And for many folk, they don't get that exposure. And that exposure will follow them not only in the acute setting, but even into the rehab environment where you might only have maybe 1 hour contact with a therapist. Now, there are a couple of variables that can affect that, particularly people's experience of fatigue after in the early days of their recovery. But it's also about trying to get those reps in. Repetition, repetition, repetition. Now, that's one of factors of the secret sauce, I guess, around neuroplasticity. And I guess we can talk about that a little bit more if you'd like, Bill. I think it's worth, when we talk about neuroplasticity, it's like coming to it from how we drive our car. I don't, I certainly don't. I don't understand how my car works other than you put fuel in, there's a spark, there's a chemical reaction, it drives the pistons, they do their thing, there's some sort of gas exchange and byproduct and that gets spat out the back end. There are a couple of auxiliary things around it being batteries, water and oil. Yeah, and I'm probably showing the depth of my knowledge around how my car works. I do know that when it stops or it doesn't work, I go through a bit of a safety check. I know that there are a couple of things I need to check on to make sure it runs well. But I guess that's probably a nice point to think about our neuroplasticity in our brain. Our brain's divided into 2 hemispheres. It's got working units called neurons. They're the guys that provide the electrical signals and allows us to get networks happening, and they communicate with each other via neurotransmitters. We would have heard of neurotransmitters of dopamine, serotonin, glutamate, GABA, etc. And then we've got receptors. These receptors sit on the neuron cells, and they are like little gates that trigger a certain behaviour.
If you've had a stroke and are in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind, like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously because you've never had a stroke before, you probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
Neurons clustered together in groups, and they also reach out to other areas of the brain and they form networks. When a stroke happens, we can get death in those neurons, and those connections in the local area and also their communications to other areas of the brain or body are affected. Their ability to create neurotransmitters is affected. So that's essentially, at a very gross level, some of the elements associated with our brain's function. And neuroplasticity is working at that cellular level of, we can either grow new axonal connections. We can prune them back or trim them up. We can weaken them or strengthen them. And that allows us to adapt, change, reacquire, sharpen our skills. And we want to try and trigger that as much as possible. And when we look at those activities that we can do to help those new pathways where we've lost a function in an area, what in that neighbourhood can acquire those skills. Now, certainly the severity and impact of a stroke and the size and scale of it will have impact on our capacity of what we will regain and what that will look like. Now, I wish I had a crystal ball to give people a clear view about what that trajectory looks like, but it can be very individual. The factors that influence that are going to be about, obviously, this type of stroke, what we eat, how we sleep, how our heart health is, how much we have in connection with purpose, how much love and support do we have around us. These are all factors that are going to influence our own trajectory. And I guess we can dive in a little bit and talk about what are those ingredients for neuroplasticity, if you'd like, Bill.
Yeah, we'll do that in a little bit. So earlier, you spoke about the neuroplasticity. You spoke about it in a positive light, in that we can connect your neuronal structures, we can grow them. And then you spoke about pruning them and losing them. So people have heard about neuroplasticity, and there seems to be a feeling that it's only a positive thing, but it is also possible to have negative neuroplasticity, to unlearn behaviors and to change the brain in a way that doesn't serve us. So can you shed some light on the opposite of positive neuroplasticity, which is that pruning aspect that you mentioned?
Maybe to just to tease that point out a little bit more. Neuroplasticity helps us adapt our grow new connections, strengthens connections, weakens connections. That in itself can have a positive outcome or a negative outcome. The pruning can be a very positive thing. We want to inhibit certain behaviors. We want to refine certain skills. That means that we have less noise around that communication between neurons by retracting and pruning and getting clarity in that direct signaling. So neuroplasticity itself is about strengthening connections, weakening connections, growing new connections. The outcome can be positive or it can be negative. Mm-hmm. And that's when we talk about the light or dark aspects. Well, I think I could almost coin it around the Star Wars analogy. There is a light and a dark side. So in regards to the dark side, it is the negative maladaptive features. Now, if we think about that, I'm reaching for a cup, for example. I'll pull up my water bottle here and speak at the same time. Can you see that there, Bill?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to reach for that water bottle. Now, as I reach for it, now if this is my right side, let's say it's my effective side. I use a lot of excessive movements to reach and grasp. What if at the same time I have a higher or an increased excitability on the other side where this hand, my left hand, starts to rise at the same time? I guess what's happening at that time is that I'm getting a change and excitation on the other side, which is being paired with that movement where I'm getting overt movements that shouldn't be there. You could say that's a negative, maladaptive strategy. I would like to have that as one side working without the other side kicking in as a overt response if it's not needed.
Right.
We can talk about mood elements too, such as depression, as being a maladaptive strategy where we've had negative elements, a negative outcome of neuroplasticity, being that we're being trapped in that sort of darker negative worldview.
Right.
The elements of neuroplasticity can support these negative behaviors, habits, and thoughts.
So is it like when one of the hands is affected by stroke and it's harder to use the affected hand, we
Mhm.
stop using it and we swap and we use the other hand, and then as a result of that, we are pruning or making connections of the affected hand weaker because we've stopped using that and now
Correct.
we've swapped
Correct.
sides.
That's a negative consequence of neuroplasticity.
Right.
Neuroplasticity is positive, negative, neutral. It doesn't care. It's going to do what it does,
Right.
dependent on the stimuli that you give it.
Right. Okay.
So that the outcome is less movement. The outcome is negative thoughts. The outcomes are non-meaningful habits. I guess you could call them the dark side of neuroplasticity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we are looking at recovery in a stroke, we want to strengthen, grow skills which contribute to a functional life.
Right.
We want to harness that beautiful potential of our brain in a way that continues to support our development of skills and reacquisition of skills, cognition, memory skills, problem-solving skills, all the things that our brain does for us.
Yeah. So how do we do the positive version of neuroplasticity? How do we do the one that is going to support our outcome in a well-lived life, in a life that allows us to have to be ourselves, to do the things that we want to do, to interact with our children, to tie the ponytail in the back of our daughter's hair, to tie our shoelaces? How do we do positive neuroplasticity? And I'm sorry if that's not the right terminology, but that's kind of how it feels to me, that we need to do the better version, the lighter version of neuroplasticity, not the darker version.
Yeah. I guess if neuroplasticity does not care whether it is a positive or negative outcome. It still will be neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
When we want a positive outcome, you've hit the nail on the head, is stating all those things: tie the ponytail in our children's hair or our grandchildren's hair, get my shirt on and do my buttons by myself without having to have help from my partner, to be able to get my words out clearly and smoothly without having to get stuck trying to find it or get words incorrectly placed. All those things are in front of us. And I guess the most important thing, particularly as a therapist, when I'm working with people, and we mention this right up at the front of our conversation, which is having a meaningful goal. It keeps us focused and aligns our energy and attention to the skills we want to acquire. If we keep that vigilance on that, and it may be a huge goal, like that chap with drinking a Corona. It was huge. That was like climbing Everest.
Yeah.
The gap from where he was to that was massive.
Yeah, because that means that he's with his friends, he's able to have a social experience, he's able to celebrate, he's able to have a bit of a drink. That's a really amazing thing, to be able to be with your friends and do that. It feels like, you're back to a really good normal space.
I'm feeling human. I'm feeling valued. I'm feeling like I can do this. I've got hope. I'm not marginalized. I'm not marginalizing myself because I feel I can't. I'm not hiding in myself. All those things that people experience can reduce and shrink our world. When we have our focus on a goal, that helps us map out what are the steps to get there. And there might be many milestones to get to that goal. And for that chap, we just got our first goal was trying to hit the button on the lift. It was halfway getting the arm up, but we were halfway there to getting something to our mouth.
Yeah.
So, it starts with those things. So what do we need to do that? Well, we needed to set up a program to simulate those skills. We need to put in daily activities that are going to challenge that. And I guess this is coming now down to when we want to have a positive outcome for neuroplasticity, we've got to work on those positive outcomes we desire.
Mm.
If we are slipping into those negative elements that aren't pro-life, pro-participation, pro-me feeling good in myself, they're going to cause a change in our brain to take them the other way.
Yeah.
Personality changes, huge ones that can happen post-stroke.
Yeah.
Working on those things that we want to cultivate. Well, I've got to go after that like a terrier after a rat. It's got to be that persistent.
Yeah, I remember after my initial rehabilitation, which lasted for a month, and then when I was at outpatient rehab, which was 3 times a week for about 6 months, one of the questions that my occupational therapist asked me was, what else do you want to do? So, of course, I wanted to get home. I wanted to get back to work. I wanted to do all that stuff. That was all the standard, usual things. Then what I didn't realize I wanted to do was I didn't realize that I wanted to run again. Now, if you look at me, people looking at me won't be able to tell that I've had a stroke and that I have deficits. But when it comes to running, I can't run. And I can't run because the way the muscles are tense on the left side makes it difficult for my knee. When my foot lands, it makes it really difficult. And I became afraid of running, and I became concerned about running. And when they asked me what I wanted to do, I didn't say running a marathon or anything like that. I just said I'd like to be able to run across the road in case there's a car coming. When I'm getting to my office or somebody's house or wherever I was going, And that was really interesting. So it sounds like what you're saying is that's the type of thing. Because if I wasn't able to cross the road confidently, if I wasn't able to run across the road to get away from a car, I would feel it would be extremely difficult for me to go anywhere and do anything. I wouldn't feel good about myself crossing the road. I wouldn't be confident about it. I would have anxiety about it, and it would really impact my life in a negative way. So when I discovered that my real issue was, in my mind, I thought that I couldn't do a running motion. And of course, my occupational therapist took me through the process to prove to me that I was doing a running motion, even though it didn't feel correct because my knee doesn't feel supported and my muscles are responding differently these days. He still proved it to me by videoing how I was running and saying to me, look at you, you are running. So then the focus was turned on, forget about the negative reasons why I hadn't run in 6 months, and then start focusing on how I can run, even if it is slightly off and I'm not doing the proper perfect running motion. I am still able to move faster off of the road than a walk, and then I considered myself running. Now, I don't play sport. I can't run in that fashion and play sport, all that type of thing, but I definitely feel confident about getting out of the car and crossing the road and being safe in that environment.
And the thing with your running analogy is that you decided that was important for you. It had a real world element to it. It was in your reality. It was something that was meaningful for you. And so if I was to probably unpack what that the steps then for what you did through that process, it would have been requiring repetition. You would have done something frequently about doing that running element, or the precursors, the things before the run. What are the essential things? Well, I need good bottom strength, bottom muscles, my glutes. I needed to have good hamstring coordination. I need to have good reasonable core. I needed to have good sensation. All right, tick, tick, tick. We've got those things. Now let's simulate something that starts that process. Where are you at? Well, I can't run across roads that have got uneven territory. Fair enough. We'll do it on a treadmill. We'll start here. Then we might add in some novelty. We might get you doing some balance boards and things like that. We increase the effort and challenge. Effort and challenge needs to be there. The sort of effort that we're after when we're doing anything to try and shunt neuroplasticity or get it working needs to be in a sense of a 6 to 8 out of 10 level of effort. Mm-hmm. So 10 out of 10 is the most challenging thing you've ever done. 0 to 10 is not much, no effort at all. We want to be in that zone around 6 to 8 out of 10, personally, for you, not for me, not for the therapist standing next to you, not for your loved one saying you're not trying hard enough, for you. It needs to be 6 to 8 out of 10, like I'm in that zone. You need to be doing it for a period long enough. And now in the early phase, you might find exhaustion kicks in. And so something that started out as a 6 out of 10 quickly becomes a 10 out of 10. Well, that's when you pull up stumps and you stop. However, over time, you'll find that you're able to sustain that 6 out of 10 to 8 out of 10 level of effort for longer. And for a period of time, if you're hitting it for 20 to 30 minutes and it's a 6 to 8 out of 10 and it's actually getting easier, well, guess what? We need to make it harder. So it needs to be evolving in its challenge. Much like going up a set of stairs, we go up, make sure that we're hitting that plateau, then we go up again, and we're continually evolving our level of effort. Because if I asked you, Bill, when you first started off your return to running, and that level of effort was a 6 to 8 out of 10, what you're doing at the beginning to where you are now, would it be a 6 out of 10 anymore? No, it'd be much less.
Yeah, first it was walking on a line that was drawn on the ground, on the surface.
Yep.
And then the steps were added a little later. So the course became a bit longer, then it was 1 step, and then it was 2 steps, then it was 3 steps, and so on. So it did evolve and change. Now that you say it, it was a very gentle introduction, and then a little bit more challenging towards the end of that month of initial rehabilitation. And then we followed a similar pattern to the outpatient rehabilitation, which happened over 6 months.
Okay. The other element then to consider in are we triggering neuroplasticity is creating conditions for novel or newness. Things which are novel and new helps us to really bring our skills to bear, really challenges us, creates a unique scenario, and we're having to adapt. Our neurons are firing off in that network and they're going, hang on, how do we deal with this? It might take you a little bit longer. It might take you a little bit more. It might increase that level of challenge for you. But that newness and novelty is important, and you might repeat and repeat and repeat that until it doesn't feel new and novel anymore. And that's why I say with Dr. Mike's work and his platform with Brain HQ, we tend to get a saturation effect after around 3 to 4 months. When people have applied and used those games, that's when they need to have a stop. Because why? The novelty's worn off. Things like repetition and effort are there, but the novelty has worn off. That's when we need to think about making sure that things are connected to real world experiences. So we can practice our reaching and grasping the cones and picking up the various different objects and repeat and create something new by adding a different shape in there. But for that gentleman that we spoke about right at the beginning of this conversation and his return to being able to drink a Corona, we need to create a real world situation. And we can practice those things of the arm and the movement, etc., but things need to be linked to real world. You need to deal with the dynamic things that happen in day-to-day life. And so we try to engineer more of that into it as well. And ultimately, we're wanting to cement things around neuroplasticity. They need to be rewarding. And so when we are talking about what's the most important thing, goals. Nailing and getting clear on our goals, because they help add that secret sauce of I'm getting there, I'm doing this, it's rewarding, I'm moving forward.
So it's about having a goal or a number of goals and achieving them, or working towards achieving them, and then looking back on where you started, reflecting on how I wasn't able to do X and how far I've come in being able to do that now, so that you can feel good about that you're actually making progress, and then you are motivated to continue to put in the effort and the doing of neuroplasticity. And then as a result of that, as you continue to be able to, for me, for example, walk across the road when it's safe, then speed up a little bit and run across the road when I need to get off the road quicker, and then potentially find another place where I could do something like that that was part of something that I enjoy to do, for example, sport, where I might not play a full 50-minute game or an hour game, but I might be able to run for a small amount of time and kick a ball or do something that I also previously enjoyed doing. So I've taken a task that was about making me safe across a road, and now I've turned it into a task that I can apply in another area, which is sport. So if I went to the sporting ground with my friends, I could still kick the ball even though I wasn't fully participating in a totally full-on game of soccer or football.
Yeah, exactly. So you've seen the evolution of your goal. Your first marker in that journey was, I just want to walk.
Yeah.
Second step in that journey was, I'd like to walk better.
Yeah.
And that walking better might be for me to get up and down from my bed at night time and get to the bathroom. That's me doing it with confidence. I want to be able to do that. And through that journey, it said, no, I'm returning back to work and I want to be able to move quickly about my work site or get out of the way of some oncoming traffic because I do have to cross the road. So I need to hop to it. And I loved running. I really wouldn't mind getting back to running. And for me, running might be, just in the backyard with the kids or grandkids. And then from there I went, I can do this. I wonder if I could go back to the gym down the road and do a little bit more vigorous stuff and get into that world. And if I could do that, what would be my next step? Now, you've seen the evolution of your goals. There are 7 factors that are part of the neuroplasticity ingredients list. So if you're your own engineer of your recovery at home and you're listening to this, these are the 7 things that I think are really, really important for creating the conditions of neuroplasticity. You've got a goal in mind. Well, okay, what are the things that need to be present in the tasks to achieve that? Well, we've already spoken about it, repetition. You need to repeat it, and it might be an element of the activity. It might be a subcomponent of the overall task. I want to run. Well, you described I need to walk a straight line first. You need to be able to do that. I repeat. I need to have a level of effort, number 2. Level of effort needs to be there. And that effort is something around a 6 to 8 out of 10 level of effort. That scale is going to change, and it's your level of effort. It's not your therapist. It's not your loved one. It's your level of perceived effort. It needs to be novel. There needs to be some newness into this. Because if you repeat, that level of effort is going to change, and you need to create some novelty and newness with it. So it's evolving. Is perhaps the 4th point in all this. It's evolving over time. So what was a 6 to 8 out of 10 yesterday, in a week's time, it's likely that activity will not be 6 to 8 out of 10 anymore. It's probably going to be a 4. We know that if we want those neurons to do their pruning, to do their growing, to do that strengthening work that we want, we need to make sure that it's always in that secret zone of around, that secret source zone of around 6 to 8 out of 10. So it needs to be evolving. We need to be doing this for a period of time. So duration is important. We need to be going after this and exposing ourselves to these exercises, these steps, these tasks, not only repetitively, but we need it in a good chunk of time. We need to put in the reps and we need to do it over a block of time. Things need to have a connection with the real world. If you're going to play football at a professional league and all you did was do gym workouts, do you think you're going to cut it on the field? It's unlikely you won't. You probably won't. So things need to have real world connection. So you can do all your exercises in isolation, but they need to have an element of real world practical application. So Bill, if we're taking your running analogy and and that was the goal, well, it's great to be able to do something on the physiotherapist floor in the gym. It's one thing to be able to walk across the flat surfaces of your home. It's another entirely to walk barefoot across the grass in the backyard with the grandkids or kids.
Yeah.
We need to have it in real world applications. We need that novelty there. And lastly, Things need to be rewarding. Things need to have that element of success. And having our goals lined up and our sub-goals and those key steps there are going to help us get on that pathway to success. And, all these activity elements is how we engineer that wonderful process in your brain that is available to you and I and any stroke survivor out there, which is neuroplasticity. You put these ingredients in any task that you're doing with a goal in mind, you're going to put yourself in a better position for things to adapt, change, reorganize, and grow.
Yeah. And
for
what
the
if you,
outcome that you want.
that's it. And what if you do put yourself, and I know that that's how you go about supporting your clients. What if you do put yourself in that situation where things can adapt and grow? Then what can people expect later in their lives? Like, what does that lead to? What comes from that?
Yeah, well, I think time is just one of those things that you wish you could collapse and step through a door and it goes from one point to the next very quickly. This is a hard journey, Bill. I don't want to sugarcoat this in any way at all to say that this is an easy journey. You've been dealt a hand of cards that life has changed dramatically from what you knew before the stroke to after the stroke. And now you're in a position to make some choices in your life that it just requires daily effort and commitment. But in taking away from what others' experiences are, for the show that you've put here, Bill, to hear what others are experiencing and what professionals in the field are demonstrating, we can see change over time. Now, for that gentleman who did not have any movement in his arm, and when I say did not, he had more spasticity, and he had flickers of movement in his fingers. He had some wrist movement. He had some shoulder movement, but it wasn't pulled together in a way that was functional. From that, over time, on that basis, he was able to improve, to achieve his goal, grab that Corona, have a drink during a football game. I've got colleagues that are using tools with robots, robotic assisted upper limb recovery, where they are using the minutest level and flicker of movement as a basis to work from. We've got evidence coming out around the use of transcranial direct stimulation and magnetic stimulation as having a top-down effect, where we're having increase in excitation of neurons to allow them to adapt and change. There's not a lot of evidence to give us good confidence in what those treatment doses look like, but that's where we're heading.
But there is a lot of evidence about what we can do to support neuroplasticity.
Oh, without a doubt. So,
and how we can help people feel better about themselves, achieve things, get back to experiencing a lifestyle that they prefer to experience, one that makes them an active member of their community, of their family. And as a result of those 7 things: repetition, effort, the novelness or the newness, evolving that thing that you're learning when it becomes easier, evolving it and making it a little bit more difficult to achieve. And then the duration of that and putting in a lot of time and effort into that. And giving it a real world application, which I think is really important, and making it rewarding. For me, all those things are things that I experienced and didn't realize I was experiencing. If we can do that, then definitely people are going to notice some form of difference between where they were when they started and where they are sometime down the track.
Exactly, Bill. These are the ingredients that we are able to control, the levers we are able to pull on in designing tasks around us, which will create the conditions for neuroplasticity, for brain change.
Beautiful. Sounds like a perfect time to wrap up this podcast. Before we go, where can people find out a little bit more about you?
Oh, thanks, Bill. Yes, occupationaltherapybrisbane.com.au is my practice's website. You can look at a number of resources there that I've got there. I talk about stroke quite a lot on my website, and a few blog articles there might be of interest to people as well.
And we'll put those links of any of those blog articles or anything that's related to stroke that you'd like to share on the show notes. David, thanks so much for the opportunity to have a chat to you about neuroplasticity. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill.
Discover how to support your recovery after stroke. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com.